The unexpected arrival. It was supposed to be the perfect fresh start. After years of living in cramped apartments and dealing with noisy neighbors, the protagonist had finally managed to buy their dream house. Nestled in the outskirts of town, it was a secluded property with sprawling gardens, a large backyard, and a history that stretched back centuries. They were excited to settle in and enjoy the peaceful solitude. The kind of life they had always imagined. But little did they know, the house held secrets that would shatter their reality. It had been a long, exhausting day of moving in. The protagonist had barely managed to unpack a few boxes and arrange their furniture when exhaustion finally caught up with them. With the moon casting a pale glow through the curtains, they collapsed onto their new bed, the soft sheets enveloping them in a sense of comfort. Sleep came quickly, and they sank into it deeply, unaware of what awaited them. The house creaked and groaned in the night, but this was nothing new. It was old, after all. However, what the protagonist didn't expect was the feeling of something strange brushing against their skin, a soft touch that jolted them from their sleep. Their eyes snapped open to find themselves in a situation they couldn't make sense of. A woman was hovering above them, strangely still, almost as if she was waiting for something. The protagonist's heart skipped a beat. Their breath caught in their throat as they struggled to understand what was happening. She was on top of them, her face inches away, her eyes locked on theirs. Her presence was so close that they could feel her breath on their skin, yet her movements were silent, like she was trying not to disturb them. At first, the protagonist thought they were dreaming. Perhaps this was just another sleep-induced illusion, a vivid nightmare. But the more they blinked and tried to focus, the clearer it became that this was real. The woman was unlike anyone they'd seen before. She had an otherworldly aura, her features too perfect, her eyes too intense. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her face, and she wore a peculiar outfit that seemed a mix of futuristic and something ancient. Everything about her seemed out of place in their new, simple home. What are you doing?" the protagonist stammered, their voice shaky as they pushed themselves up, trying to escape the strange woman's presence. But she didn't budge, her grip tightening on their shoulders as though she was holding them in place. "I'm here to protect you," the woman whispered, her voice calm but firm, as though she had said these words 1,000 times before. "You are not safe here." The words sent a chill down the protagonist's spine. "What do you mean?" they managed to ask, their pulse racing. Was she a burglar? Some sort of intruder? But the woman's next words caught them completely off guard. "You don't understand yet, but you will," she continued, her gaze never leaving theirs. "This house has a power. And it's drawing unwanted attention." The protagonist's mind raced. They had just moved in. How could they already be in danger? But before they could respond, the woman placed a finger gently over their lips, signaling them to stay silent. "Please listen," she said, her tone no longer forceful but filled with urgency. "There's something much bigger happening. Something you won't be able to ignore. And I'm the only one who can stop it from reaching you." The protagonist's heart pounded in their chest. They wanted to question her, to ask more, but a sense of dread began creeping into their thoughts. This wasn't a normal situation. None of it made sense. But somehow, deep down, they knew she wasn't lying. Something about her seemed authentic. And that terrified them even more. Her eyes softened as if she sensed their growing panic. "I didn't want to wake you this way," she said with a sigh. "But time is running out. And I need you to trust me." The protagonist sat frozen, struggling to make sense of the situation. What did she mean by unwanted attention? Who was she, and why was she here? What could this house possibly be hiding? The housekeeper, if that's what she was, hadn't answered any of the questions that swirled in the protagonist's mind. Instead, she seemed to expect them to follow her without fully explaining why. The only thing they knew for sure was this: their new life in this house was about to become much more complicated than they ever imagined. And whatever secret it held, they were now a part of it. A shocking confession. The protagonist sat up in bed, still in a daze, trying to process the strange woman's words. The housekeeper, who wasn't really a housekeeper, was standing a few feet away now, her posture tense as she waited for a response. Her presence felt even more alien in the silence that followed. The moonlight outside the window cast long, eerie shadows across the room, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said, breaking the silence. "But you need to understand that your life here, in this house, is no ordinary life." The protagonist struggled to focus. They rubbed their eyes, trying to shake off the sense that they were caught in a surreal nightmare. "Wait, what are you talking about? You're telling me this house has some kind of power? And I'm in danger?" The housekeeper nodded solemnly. "Yes. This house isn't just a home. It's something much more than that. It's a nexus, a place where powerful forces converge." The protagonist frowned. "What do you mean, a nexus? And what kind of forces are you talking about?" The woman took a deep breath, and for the first time, her confident demeanor faltered just slightly. "I wasn't supposed to tell you all of this just yet. But the truth is, the house itself has attracted attention. Attention from beings, creatures, who are not human. They are far more powerful than anything you could imagine. And they want something this house is hiding." The words were like a punch to the gut. The protagonist's mind reeled. How could a simple house, the one they had just moved into, be so important? And who, or what, could possibly want something it was hiding? The very idea of powerful, non-human beings lurking in the shadows was enough to send a chill down their spine. Wait, the protagonist said, their voice trembling. "You're saying there are aliens here? Right now?" The housekeeper gave a small, rueful smile. "That's one way of putting it. But yes, there are beings from beyond your world who have been watching this house for a very long time." The protagonist's mind was spinning. "But, you said you were here to protect me. Why? How do you know all this?" The housekeeper's eyes hardened. "Because I'm not human. And neither are they." The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of her words settled over the protagonist. They stared at her in disbelief, their pulse racing. "You're not human." She nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm from a planet far from Earth. My species has been tasked with keeping this house safe from those who would exploit its power. You're the new occupant. And the moment you arrived, the forces began to stir." The protagonist was speechless. They opened their mouth to speak but found that no words would come. The idea that the house they had just bought was connected to some kind of cosmic conflict was beyond anything they could have ever imagined. Was this some kind of elaborate hoax? A prank? It didn't feel like one. "Are you saying you're here to protect me from aliens?" the protagonist finally managed to ask, their voice filled with confusion. The housekeeper nodded again, but there was something more in her eyes this time, a quiet, almost sorrowful expression. "I wish it were that simple. The truth is, I'm not the only one watching over you. There are others like me, scattered across the galaxy, assigned to similar tasks. But the beings who want what's hidden in this house, they are far more dangerous. And they're closing in." The protagonist could feel their heart pounding in their chest. What is it they want? What's hidden here? The housekeeper's face tightened, as though she was reluctant to answer. "I can't say just yet. I'm not allowed to. But I'll tell you this, the power in this house is ancient. It's older than your world itself. And if it falls into the wrong hands, it will change everything." The air felt heavy with the weight of her words. The protagonist's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. A house with ancient, untold power. Alien forces trying to take it. And a mysterious woman who claimed to be sent to protect them. Nothing about this situation made sense, yet deep down, a strange part of them knew it was true. "So, what do we do now?" the protagonist asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "What happens next?" The housekeeper's eyes softened, but her expression remained serious. "Now, you trust me. And we prepare." "Prepare for what?" She stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "They'll be here soon. And when they come, we won't be able to stop them alone. You're going to need to help me. Whether you're ready or not." The protagonist took a deep breath, their mind whirling with fear and disbelief. But there was no time to waste. The housekeeper's warning echoed in their ears. The aliens were coming, and whatever secret this house held, they were ready to fight for it. And for the first time since moving in, the protagonist realized they weren't just living in a house. They were in the middle of something much bigger. Something they couldn't turn away from. But could they really trust this woman? Could they trust themselves? The answers were coming, but not fast enough. The true identity. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one a mixture of uncertainty and fear. The protagonist couldn't shake the sense that they were being drawn into something they had no control over. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind through the trees, seemed to whisper a warning. The housekeeper, who had finally introduced herself as Lyra, had become a constant presence. She was always nearby, watching over them, keeping them safe, but from what, exactly? The protagonist tried to go about their day, but their thoughts always returned to Lyra's cryptic warnings. Every time they passed a mirror or looked out the window, they felt as if someone, or something, was watching them. And it wasn't just the house that had an unsettling aura, it was Lyra herself. She was unlike anyone they had ever met, and every interaction left them with more questions than answers. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the house was cloaked in the eerie glow of twilight, the protagonist sat down with Lyra in the living room. They had tried to avoid it for as long as they could, but now they couldn't ignore it any longer. "Lyra," the protagonist said, their voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "I need to know the truth. Who are you really?" Lyra was sitting across from them, her expression calm, yet there was something in her eyes that flickered, a sadness, perhaps, or a regret. She didn't look surprised by the question, but the pause before she spoke told the protagonist that this was something she had been preparing to reveal. "I told you before that I'm not human," Lyra said softly, her eyes lowering as if to gather her thoughts. "But that's not the whole story. I'm not just an alien. I'm from a species that exists in the far reaches of the galaxy, one that's been watching over humanity for millennia." The protagonist's heart raced. "You're saying, you've been here for centuries? Watching us?" Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes. My people have been here long before humanity ever knew we existed. We've watched you evolve, helped guide you in ways you never understood. But our role has always been subtle. We have never interfered in the natural course of your history, until now." The weight of her words hung in the air. The protagonist was stunned. They had known that something was different about Lyra, but the idea that she had been here, observing humanity for so long, was almost too much to comprehend. How could something like that be possible? "What do you mean, until now?" the protagonist asked, leaning forward. "Why is this house so important? Why does it matter now?" Lyra's expression darkened, and the sense of urgency in her voice returned. "The house you're living in, it's not just a home. It's a place of immense power, one that has been hidden for centuries. My people have kept it safe for as long as we could. But the forces that seek it are growing stronger. They are relentless. And they will stop at nothing to take what's hidden here." The protagonist swallowed hard, trying to process everything. A house of immense power. What could be so important inside this seemingly ordinary home? "What's inside this house?" they asked. "What are they after?" Lyra hesitated, then slowly stood up, walking over to the window. She stared out into the night, as if gathering the courage to share something that had been weighing on her for a long time. "It's not just what's inside the house that matters," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's the house itself. The energy that it holds. My people have kept it contained, but there are others, beings from another dimension, who have been searching for it. They know it's here, and they've been hunting for it for centuries." The protagonist's mind was reeling. Other dimensions? Beings hunting for a house. The situation was quickly spiraling into territory they didn't think possible. Lyra turned back to face the protagonist, her eyes meeting theirs with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "My true name is not Lyra. I come from a race known as the Seraphs. We were the first to encounter Earth, before your ancient civilizations ever rose. We are the guardians of your world's hidden secrets. My mission here is to protect this house, and you, until it's safe. Because the moment those forces find this place, everything will change. And you'll be caught in the middle of it." The word stung, as if a weight had settled on the protagonist's chest. They had no idea that their simple move into this house would thrust them into a cosmic conflict. The thought that Lyra was part of a race of beings who had watched over Earth for so long seemed impossible. But as they looked into her eyes, they knew she was telling the truth. There was something ancient and wise behind her gaze, something that felt more real than anything else in their life. "So, you're saying I'm in danger? And this house is the key to everything?" the protagonist asked, trying to steady their breath. Lyra nodded again. "Yes. But you're not alone in this. I'll help you. I'm here to make sure you're ready for what's coming." The protagonist felt their world shift beneath their feet. All of this, the strange house, the alien woman who wasn't what she seemed, had pulled them into something bigger than they could have ever imagined. They weren't just fighting for their safety anymore. They were fighting for the fate of Earth itself. Lyra stepped closer, her voice firm. "Whatever happens, you need to understand one thing: there is no turning back. This fight will come to your doorstep soon, and when it does, we will have to face it together." The protagonist's thoughts were a whirlwind, but one thing was clear: their life would never be the same. And the house they had thought would bring them peace had just become the battleground for the future of humanity. The alien invasion. The following days passed in a blur of preparation, anxiety, and sleepless nights. The protagonist could feel it: the air in the house seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lyra remained by their side, constantly vigilant, giving little explanation but urging them to stay alert. She moved through the house with a quiet intensity, always checking the windows, the doors, and even the walls as though she was searching for something that wasn't immediately visible. The protagonist couldn't help but notice that, as time went on, the house itself began to feel less like a home and more like a fortress. The once welcoming rooms now felt cold, and the strange whispers of the wind outside no longer seemed peaceful. The house had become an ominous place, charged with an energy that unsettled the protagonist to their core. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Lyra's behavior became even more urgent. She had been pacing in the living room for hours, her eyes darting toward the windows every few seconds, her fingers tightening around the edges of a small device that seemed out of place. "Lyra, what's going on?" the protagonist asked, their voice trembling with anxiety. "What's happening?" Lyra stopped in her tracks, her gaze locking onto the protagonist. "It started," she said, her voice low but sharp with urgency. "They're coming. They've located the house." The protagonist's heart raced. "Who? Who's coming?" "The beings I told you about," Lyra replied, her eyes flashing with a dangerous glint. "The ones I've been protecting you from. They're no longer searching, they're here." Suddenly, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if something was pressing down from above. The once familiar creaks and groans of the house now sounded like distant footsteps, echoes of something, or someone, approaching. The protagonist could feel the ground beneath their feet vibrate ever so slightly, as though the entire house was coming alive with an unknown force. Lyra turned and moved quickly toward the front door, her hand raised in a silent gesture for the protagonist to follow. Without a word, the protagonist obeyed, their instincts urging them to trust her. When they reached the door, Lyra paused, her eyes narrowing. The device in her hand began to glow faintly, a soft blue light that illuminated her face. She activated it, and the door's lock clicked open. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice steady despite the panic that was brewing around them. "Stay close, and follow my lead. Do exactly as I say." The protagonist nodded, adrenaline rushing through their veins. Their hands were clammy, their heart pounding in their chest. What were they about to face? As the door swung open, they were met with the sight of the vast front yard stretching out before them, bathed in the faint light of the moon. But what should have been a peaceful, quiet evening was anything but. The air was thick with tension, and the trees swayed in unnatural ways. Far off in the distance, dark shapes began to move across the horizon, like shadows creeping toward them. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "They're getting closer," she muttered, more to herself than to the protagonist. Then, from the edge of the yard, a low hum echoed through the night. It was a sound unlike anything the protagonist had ever heard, deep, resonant, vibrating in their bones. Lyra's face tightened with concentration as she held up her device, which began to pulse with the same blue light. "They're not just searching for the house anymore," Lyra said, her voice tight. "They've activated their signal. The forces are preparing to breach this reality." "What are you talking about?" the protagonist asked, fear creeping into their voice. "What's happening? What does that mean?" Before Lyra could answer, the ground suddenly trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to distort. A pulse of energy shot through the air, rippling across the landscape like a shockwave. The protagonists stumbled back, their heart racing as a low, guttural sound filled the air, a sound that was both alien and terrifying. From the horizon, the shapes that had once appeared distant now came into focus, revealing themselves to be massive, hovering ships. They weren't like anything the protagonist had ever seen before, sleek, metallic, and unlike any human-made technology. The ships seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, their surface rippling and shifting as though they were alive. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice almost a growl. "They've come for the house." The protagonist could barely process what they were seeing. The ships were descending slowly, their immense size dwarfing everything below. As they drew nearer, a flickering light began to glow from within, casting an eerie blue glow across the yard. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved swiftly toward a small shed at the edge of the yard, pulling the protagonist along with her. "Inside. Now," she commanded. Without thinking, the protagonist followed her, the door slamming shut behind them as they ducked inside. It was dark and musty in the shed, but Lyra didn't slow down. She moved toward a hidden panel in the floor and pressed a series of buttons, causing the ground to shift beneath them. "We can't fight them directly," Lyra explained quickly, her voice grim. "They're too powerful. We need to hide. The house has a hidden layer, a shield that's been protecting it for centuries. If we can get there before they break through, we can survive." The shed seemed to tremble again as the hum of the ships grew louder. The protagonist could hear the distant sound of engines, of something monstrous moving toward them. Lyra's voice cut through the noise. "Stay close to me. This is only the beginning." As the ground beneath them shifted, a new sense of fear and urgency filled the protagonist. The invasion had begun. They were no longer just hiding in a house. They were standing in the middle of an all-out battle for survival, and the fate of everything rested on what happened next. The hidden shield. The walls of the shed groaned as if protesting the weight of the imminent invasion. The hum of the ships outside was deafening now, vibrating through the earth beneath them. Every muscle in the protagonist's body tensed as they followed Lyra's lead, moving quickly through the cramped space toward the hidden panel she had activated. Their heart pounded in their chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the thrumming of the alien ships descending from the sky. Lyra's face was set in a grim expression, her eyes sharp, her movements precise. She seemed to know exactly what to do, but there was an urgency to her that spoke volumes. Whatever was happening, it was happening fast, and if they didn't act now, they might not survive. The protagonist followed her down into the hidden chamber, a steep set of stairs leading into a tunnel that stretched beneath the house. The air grew cooler as they descended, the darkness swallowing them up. The faint glow from Lyra's device cast an eerie light, revealing stone walls that seemed ancient. The tunnel felt like it had been here for centuries, perhaps even longer. "What is this place?" the protagonist asked, their voice shaky as they tried to keep up. "It's the core of the house's defenses," Lyra replied without slowing her pace. "The shield that's been protecting it. My people built it long ago to keep the house, and the secrets inside it, safe from forces like those that are coming now." The protagonist's mind raced. A shield? The house was more than just a house. It was an ancient fortress, a relic from a time far older than their understanding. Lyra wasn't just a guardian, she was the keeper of a hidden power that had been carefully concealed for centuries. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the tunnel opened up into a large chamber. The walls were covered in intricate markings and symbols, each one glowing faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room was a massive stone structure, a kind of control center, surrounded by glowing crystals embedded in the floor. Lyra moved toward it, her fingers dancing over a set of controls embedded in the stone. "Get ready," she said, her voice low. "We're about to activate the shield. It's not perfect, but it should be enough to hold them off, at least for a while." The protagonist took a deep breath and stepped forward, trying to ignore the sense of dread that was creeping up on them. What kind of shield could protect them from those ships, those alien forces? The vessels outside were huge, ominous, and terrifying, not like anything Earth had ever seen. How could they possibly stand a chance? Lyra's fingers moved quickly, pressing a sequence of symbols on the stone panel. The room began to hum, low and deep, as if the house itself was awakening. A soft glow began to pulse from the crystals in the floor, growing brighter as Lyra worked. "Stay close," Lyra ordered, her voice sharp with concentration. "Once the shield is up, we'll be safe for a while, but we'll need to prepare for the next phase." The protagonist glanced over at the glowing symbols, then back to Lyra. "The next phase? What do you mean?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she focused on the stone panel in front of her, her hands moving in precise patterns. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the ground. The protagonist could feel it in their bones, the power building, the shield coming online. The room was filled with a bright, almost blinding light as the energy around them surged. A sound like a thunderclap echoed through the chamber. The protagonist stumbled back, their heart racing as the walls vibrated. The ground shook violently, the hum outside growing in intensity. The ships above were getting closer. And then, the shield activated. A brilliant blue light burst out from the center of the chamber, washing over the entire room. The protagonist's breath caught in their throat as the energy formed a dome around them, a shimmering, almost invisible barrier that seemed to protect them from everything. The sound of the ships outside, distant, but growing louder, faded as the shield activated. Lyra stepped back, her face tight with a mixture of relief and concern. The shield will hold them off, but only for a short time. It's an ancient technology, and it's not indestructible. They'll figure out a way around it. The protagonist could barely process what had just happened. They were safe, at least for now. The oppressive hum of the alien ships had softened, replaced by an eerie stillness that filled the room. But the danger wasn't gone. The shield was a temporary solution, and the beings outside weren't about to give up that easily. "So, what now?" the protagonist asked, their voice steady despite the fear gnawing at their insides. Lyra's eyes met theirs, her expression grim. Now, we wait. But we also prepare for what's coming next. They'll come for the house, no matter what. And when they do, we'll have to fight. You'll need to learn how to use the tools we have down here. How to defend yourself. I won't always be able to protect you. The protagonist swallowed hard, the weight of Lyra's words sinking in. They had been thrust into this war, into this fight for survival, without any real preparation. They didn't even know what they were up against. But one thing was clear, they had no choice but to learn quickly. The fight for the house was just beginning. Lyra turned to face the control center again, her hands moving over the panel once more. I'll show you how to use the weapons hidden in the walls. We'll need them when the shield fails. You'll need to be ready. The protagonist nodded, the reality of their situation sinking in. There was no running from this. The alien forces were coming, and the fate of the house, and possibly the entire planet, rested in their hands. But as Lyra began to teach them the basics of the hidden weapons and defensive measures, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. The house wasn't just an ordinary place of power, it was connected to something far greater, something that Lyra wasn't telling them. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the bigger picture was still out of reach. And with every passing moment, the countdown to the next phase of the invasion drew closer. The breach. The stillness inside the hidden chamber felt like a temporary reprieve, but it was quickly becoming unbearable. Lyra moved like a seasoned warrior, her every action calculated and purposeful, while the protagonist could only try to keep up. Every instruction, every lesson she gave on how to use the weapons and defensive systems felt like a distant echo, as if they weren't quite ready for what was coming next. Despite the shield holding strong, there was an undercurrent of tension that couldn't be ignored. The hum of the alien ships above seemed to grow louder, the pressure building with each passing moment. The shield was only a temporary solution, a mere pause in the inevitable assault. Lyra had said it herself, they couldn't outrun what was coming. They'll figure it out, Lyra had told them earlier, her voice tight. This shield isn't permanent. They'll breach it. We need to be ready. The protagonist nodded, though the truth of her words had begun to sink in. How could they fight something they didn't fully understand? How could they possibly stop an invasion from forces far beyond human comprehension? Lyra had spent hours showing the protagonist how to use the alien technology hidden within the walls. There were weapons of unimaginable power, blasters, pulse rifles, and even energy grenades, stored in secret compartments. But the protagonist wasn't sure how to wield them. These were tools designed for beings far more advanced than themselves. Yet, they had no choice but to trust in Lyra's teachings. As Lyra activated a control panel and brought up a holographic map of the area around the house, her face became even more focused. The pulse of blue light from the shield flickered softly, but it was still strong. For now, they were safe. This is where they're going to make their move, Lyra said, pointing to the map, where red dots began to appear, each one marking a location of movement. They're creating a perimeter around the house, preparing for the breach. The moment the shield weakens, they'll strike. The protagonist felt a chill run down their spine. They were being hunted. The alien forces weren't here just to observe, they were here to take what they'd come for, and they wouldn't stop until they succeeded. But how? The protagonist asked, still trying to make sense of everything. How will they breach it? Lyra's expression darkened. They've done it before. They have technology that can penetrate dimensional shields. They've been waiting for this moment for centuries. The moment the shield falters, they'll tear through it with an energy pulse that will shatter the barrier. The protagonist's mind raced. They had been thrust into a battle against forces that had been preparing for this moment for eons. The weight of the responsibility was almost too much to bear. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them again. A deep, rumbling vibration shook the chamber. Lyra's eyes flashed toward the ceiling, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. "They're starting," she said, her voice clipped. "Get to the weapons. Now." The protagonist's heart skipped a beat. They had trained with the alien weapons for hours, but nothing could prepare them for the moment when the shield would finally fall and the real fight would begin. Without a second thought, the protagonist dashed toward the weapon racks, pulling a pulse rifle from its mount and examining the sleek, alien design. They hadn't quite gotten the hang of it, but in a moment like this, there was no time for hesitation. Lyra had shown them the basics: how to aim, how to fire, and most importantly, how to survive. The trembling grew stronger, and the distant sound of the alien ships filled the chamber once again. Lyra moved quickly, activating another set of controls that caused a large door on the far side of the room to slide open. Beyond it was a small, fortified hall that led to another set of hidden rooms beneath the house. These rooms were reinforced, and Lyra had told the protagonist they would be their last line of defense. "Follow me," Lyra ordered, already moving toward the door. "We need to make our way to the core control room. If we can keep them out of there, we have a chance." The protagonist followed, their mind racing. They had never been in a fight like this, and they couldn't help but wonder if they were ready for what was about to come. But before they could think any further, a loud crash echoed from above. The shield flickered. Lyra's expression went cold. "It's begun." A blinding light exploded from the ceiling as the first energy pulse from the ships collided with the shield, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The force of it sent both Lyra and the protagonist staggering, the air crackling with energy. The walls trembled as the shield struggled to hold against the relentless assault. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice full of urgency. "We have minutes, maybe less. Once the breach happens, it'll be chaos. Stay close. Don't let go of your weapon." The protagonist tightened their grip on the pulse rifle, trying to steady their breathing. Outside, they could hear the sound of the ships hovering above, their engines purring like the growl of a predator. The breach was coming, and there was no turning back. They moved quickly down the reinforced hall, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passage. Every moment felt like an eternity. The energy pulses from above slammed into the shield again, causing the entire house to groan in protest. The barrier shimmered but held, for now. But the protagonist could sense it. The shield was weakening. "We're close," Lyra said, her voice low but steady. "The control room is just ahead. Once we get inside, we'll be able to trigger the emergency protocols. But we need to hold them off until then." They reached the control room. A small, fortified chamber at the heart of the house's defenses. Lyra stepped forward and activated another set of panels. The room hummed to life, lights flickering on as a holographic map of the surrounding area appeared before them. "They're here," Lyra said, her face tense. "They've already surrounded the house. Once the breach happens, they'll be inside. We have to hold this room at all costs." The protagonist nodded, their pulse racing as they took their position near the door. They weren't just defending the house anymore, they were defending Earth itself. And as the first crack in the shield formed above them, they knew that their fight had just begun. The final stand. The shield was failing. There was no denying it now. The once brilliant blue glow that had protected them flickered weakly as energy pulses from the alien ships rained down from above, each one hammering at the fragile barrier. The house groaned under the pressure, and the walls vibrated, as though they were alive, struggling to keep the intruders out. Lyra moved with a purpose, her eyes darting from the control panels to the weapons around the room. The emergency protocols she had activated weren't enough to keep the alien forces at bay for long. The control room was their last line of defense, and every second counted. "We don't have much time," Lyra said, her voice grim but focused. "Once the shield goes down completely, we'll be vulnerable. You have to be ready. They won't show mercy." The protagonist stood by the door, pulse rifle gripped tightly in their hands. They could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the fate of Earth. Lyra had trusted them with the secrets of the house, and now, it was their turn to protect it. They had no choice but to rise to the occasion. The first crack in the shield appeared, a brilliant flash of blue light that stretched across the sky like a jagged wound in the atmosphere. The air felt charged, crackling with energy, and for a moment, the protagonist could almost feel the alien presence closing in on them, like an invisible hand tightening around their chest. "They're coming," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "Get ready." The protagonist took a deep breath, trying to steady their nerves. The sound of the alien ships hovering above them grew louder, their engines thrumming ominously. They couldn't hear the ships, but they could feel them, as if the very air around them was vibrating with their power. Then, with a sound like thunder, the shield finally collapsed. The energy barrier flickered once more, and then, silence. In the instant that followed, the protagonist's heart skipped a beat. The world outside seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. But only for a moment. Then, the sky above the house erupted in a brilliant, blinding light as the first wave of alien soldiers descended. Lyra didn't hesitate. "Now," she shouted, and the protagonist rushed forward, firing the pulse rifle as the door to the control room slid open. The alien soldiers were unlike anything the protagonist had imagined. Tall, slender, and covered in smooth, metallic armor, they seemed almost graceful as they moved with unnatural precision. Their faces were hidden beneath helmets that shimmered with an eerie, otherworldly glow. They were fast, faster than anything human, their movements fluid and deliberate. The protagonist fired again, the pulse rifle unleashing a blast of bright energy. One of the soldiers staggered back, but it was clear that the weapon had barely scratched the surface of their armor. The alien forces were relentless, pushing forward, their weapons aimed directly at the protagonist. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to push them back. We can't let them reach the core room." Without thinking, the protagonist sprinted toward the control panel, their eyes scanning the room for anything they could use to fight back. They knew they couldn't take on these forces alone, not without more advanced weapons, more strategy. But they had no choice. The fate of everything depended on them. Lyra was already at the center of the room, moving with the speed and precision of someone who had fought countless battles before. She fired her own weapon, sending a pulse of energy into the ranks of the alien soldiers. One of them crumpled to the ground, but more appeared in their place, each one determined to breach the control room. The protagonist aimed their pulse rifle again, taking out another soldier with a well-placed shot. But they knew this wasn't enough. The alien forces were overwhelming. They needed a way to turn the tide, fast. Suddenly, a loud screech filled the air. The floor beneath them trembled as something massive began to shift in the distance. Lyra's eyes widened. "They've activated their heavy artillery. We need to disable it before they fire." The protagonist's mind raced. What could they do? They had no time to waste. The alien artillery was a deadly weapon, an energy cannon that could obliterate everything in its path. If it wasn't disabled, the house, and everything in it, would be destroyed. Lyra grabbed the protagonist's arm, her grip firm. "Follow me. We have to get to the control core." Without hesitation, they moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding the chaos of the battle outside. Every step felt like a race against time. The alien soldiers were relentless, but they were also disorganized. As long as they stayed focused, they had a chance. They reached the control core, an enormous, fortified room that held the heart of the house's defenses. The massive, glowing crystal in the center of the room pulsed with energy, the last line of defense against the alien onslaught. Lyra moved quickly, activating the controls and inputting a series of commands. "We're almost there," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. If we can overload the core, it will send a surge of energy through the house, enough to disable their artillery and knock them back. The protagonist nodded, their hands trembling as they watched Lyra work. They didn't have much time. The alien forces were getting closer, and they could feel the pressure mounting. Every second counted. Lyra turned to them. When I give the signal, you'll activate the backup system. It's the only way we can ensure a full overload. The protagonist didn't question it. They simply nodded and waited, heart pounding in their chest. Then, with a final, decisive motion, Lyra activated the core's self-destruct sequence. The room shook as the energy began to build. The crystal at the center of the room flared brightly, and the entire house seemed to tremble as the power surged through it. Now! Lyra shouted. The protagonist hit the backup switch, sending a pulse of energy through the system. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and the sky above the house erupted in a blinding flash of light. The alien ships above recoiled as their artillery was disabled, and the soldiers outside faltered, disoriented by the sudden surge of energy. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the control room exploded into action. The house's defenses kicked into high gear, sending pulses of energy outward in every direction. The alien soldiers scrambled, but it was too late. The house's core had unleashed a shockwave that tore through the alien ranks, sending them scattering in every direction. The protagonist and Lyra stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily as the battle outside raged on. They had done it. The alien forces were retreating, their invasion thwarted, for now. But the fight wasn't over. They knew that this was only the beginning. The alien forces would regroup. They would return. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the protagonist and Lyra shared a glance of quiet victory. The house had survived, and so had they. And in that moment, they knew one thing for sure, they would stand together and fight, no matter what came next.